For years, Daniel Rhodes had taken quiet pride in his modest suburban home. A retired teacher, he found joy in keeping his property neat, his hedges trimmed, and his lawn freshly cut. It wasn't the most extravagant yard on the street, but it was well kept and green enough to stand out during the hot summers. He thought of it as more than just grass. It was the front face of the home he had worked for his entire life. That peace shattered when a letter appeared in his mailbox one Tuesday afternoon. At first glance, it looked like a routine HOA update, but as he unfolded the paper, his eyes caught the bold words that made his stomach turn. Notice of violation. According to the HOA, Daniel's lawn contained an unapproved patch of dead grass, which they claimed diminished the community's curb appeal. Along with the notice came a fine, an outrageous demand for $2,000. Daniel was stunned. He inspected his lawn immediately, searching for this so-called violation. All he found was a small patch of thinning grass, barely 2 feet wide, near the sidewalk. It was hardly noticeable and certainly no worse than what other neighbors had on their lawns. Yet somehow, he was the one singled out, and the HOA expected him to pay thousands over it. The demand was more than insulting. It was predatory. The notice threatened escalating fines if he didn't comply, along with the possibility of liens on his property. Daniel knew the HOA board had a reputation for pushing homeowners around, but this was different. This was personal. As the days passed, Daniel began to notice a pattern. Other homes in the neighborhood had much larger patches of dead or yellowing grass. Some even had weeds overtaking entire sections of their yards. Yet none of those homeowners had received violation notices. It became clear that Daniel had been targeted deliberately. The face behind it all was a woman named Marjorie, a board member infamous for wielding HOA rules like weapons. She lived 2 streets over, but her reach extended into every corner of the community. She relished her role, taking any excuse to issue fines and control how people lived. Daniel refused to roll over. He began gathering evidence, photographs of his own lawn, pictures of neighbors' properties with worse conditions, and the original HOA covenant documents that outlined vague and unenforceable language. What he uncovered shocked him even more. The HOA bylaws were riddled with inconsistencies, and the fines Marjorie had issued didn't align with the rules at all. In fact, the board had quietly adjusted fine amounts without ever putting it to a community vote. Still, the letters kept coming. Each week, another envelope arrived, each one more threatening than the last. The total amount the HOA claimed he owed grew higher, stacking up to several $1,000s. Daniel realized the board wasn't just testing him. They wanted to intimidate him into submission, to make an example of him so others wouldn't dare to push back. But they had underestimated him. Behind his calm demeanor, Daniel was meticulous, patient, and unwilling to be bullied. He knew there was a way to fight back. And when he stumbled across a little-known legal loophole buried deep in the HOA's governing documents, he realized he had found the weapon that could turn the entire battle upside down. Daniel spent late nights at his kitchen table, papers spread across every inch of the surface. He studied the HOA's covenant, conditions, and restrictions, the dense legal language most homeowners ignored. But Daniel wasn't most homeowners. His background in teaching had given him patience and persistence, and he was determined to find a way out of the trap Marjorie and her board had set. That's when he discovered it, a single clause buried deep in the bylaws, written in stiff legal terms. It stated that fines could only be enforced if they were reasonable, proportionate, and approved by a majority vote of the membership. This meant the HOA board couldn't arbitrarily invent fines or raise amounts without the consent of homeowners. Yet, the board had been doing exactly that for years. The $2,000 demand for a patch of grass was not only absurd, it was completely unenforceable. Daniel's mind raced. If he could prove that the board had been overstepping its authority, not only could he invalidate his own fines, but he could also expose years of unlawful penalties the HOA had been collecting from his neighbors. He started with his own case. He printed photos of his lawn, showing it was healthy and green aside from the small patch. He collected images of nearby properties with far worse issues, none of which had received notices. Then, he assembled copies of the governing documents, highlighting the loophole. His evidence was airtight. But Daniel didn't stop there. He spoke quietly with neighbors, many of whom confessed they too had been fined for trivial things. Flower pots in the wrong place, garden ornaments deemed unapproved, even mailboxes painted a shade too dark. Most had paid out of fear of escalating penalties. They didn't know they had the right to fight back. With every conversation, Daniel's determination grew. He realized this wasn't just about his lawn anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who had been unfairly targeted. The HOA board had operated unchecked for years, counting on homeowners' ignorance and fear. Now, someone had finally uncovered their weakness. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week. Marjorie, as always, was expected to preside with her usual air of authority. Daniel decided that would be the stage for his counterattack. He prepared a binder thick with evidence, photographs, testimonies, and highlighted clauses from the bylaws. It wasn't just a defense. It was a full-scale case against the board's practices. When the night of the meeting arrived, the community center filled with homeowners. Some came for routine updates, others to quietly grumble about the board's endless rules. Daniel sat calmly in the front row, binder in hand, waiting for his moment. As Marjorie opened the floor, smug and confident, Daniel rose. Every eye turned toward him. What he was about to reveal would shatter the illusion of control the HOA board had built. He was ready to expose the hypocrisy, the manipulation, and the illegal fines that had drained his neighbors for years. The room grew quiet as Daniel stepped forward. He knew this was a turning point, the moment the battle shifted from defense to offense. And once his evidence hit the table, there would be no going back. The air in the community center was heavy with anticipation as Daniel laid his binder on the table. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, though Marjorie kept her smile fixed, confident that her authority would not be challenged. But the moment Daniel began to speak, that confidence started to waver. He began with the photographs, clear, undeniable images of his lawn. The crowd leaned forward, murmuring as they saw that the so-called violation was nothing more than a small, healthy patch of grass with a faint discoloration. Then came the comparisons. Pictures of other yards, far worse, none of which had been targeted. The room erupted with whispers as homeowners recognized their own properties in the photos. Next, Daniel presented the governing documents. He highlighted the clause that spelled doom for the board. Fines could not be enforced unless approved by a majority vote of all homeowners. The $2,000 penalty against him, along with countless others, had never been voted on. They were invalid. The HOA had been collecting money illegally for years. Gasps filled the room. Homeowners who had long grumbled in private now realized they had been victims of a scheme. Faces turned toward the board, demanding answers. Marjorie's smile cracked as she tried to deflect, insisting the fines were standard practice. But Daniel was relentless. He produced copies of financial records he had requested through a transparency clause. They showed tens of thousands of dollars collected in questionable fines, with no votes ever recorded. The tide turned quickly. Neighbors who had been silent out of fear began to speak up. One by one, they recounted their own experiences, unjust penalties, threats of liens, intimidation letters. The room became a storm of anger directed at the board. For once, the homeowners stood united. Marjorie, red-faced and flustered, tried to regain control, pounding her gavel against the table. But the authority she once held so tightly was gone. The crowd no longer feared her. They demanded accountability. They demanded change. Sensing the moment, Daniel proposed action. He cited the bylaws once more, explaining that the homeowners had the right to call for a vote of no confidence in the board. If enough supported it, the entire board could be removed and replaced. Cheers erupted as the idea took root. Petitions were signed right there in the meeting hall. By the end of the night, a majority had spoken. Within weeks, the board was dissolved. New members were elected, neighbors who genuinely cared about fairness and community, not control and punishment. As for Marjorie, she vanished from the spotlight, her reign of intimidation brought to an embarrassing end. Daniel's fines were dismissed, along with dozens of others. More importantly, the HOA's power to abuse homeowners had been stripped away. The legal loophole he uncovered had not only saved him thousands of dollars, but it had also freed his entire neighborhood from years of harassment. From that day forward, the community changed. Lawns still grew, some greener than others, but no one feared a fine over a patch of grass. The HOA became what it was meant to be, a group to maintain shared spaces, not to control lives. And Daniel, he returned to his porch, coffee in hand, overlooking his yard with quiet satisfaction. The patch of grass that once caused so much turmoil remained there, a small reminder of the fight he had won. It was proof that sometimes the smallest battles could bring about the biggest victories.